Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with another Total War Warhammer video. Today we're finally getting to see the full roster reveal for Grand Cathay. Creative Assembly have just dropped a blog and creators such as myself were given early access to it so we could talk about it. And let me tell you, there is a lot to talk about. It's a rather large roster with loads of different detail, including lore with some units. I know some people aren't keen on that, but it brings a lot of context to it. So let's not waste any more time and jump right in. Now, we are going to have to talk about the legendary lords, as of course some unique abilities, skills, and even some interesting information does come to light here. So let's start off with Meow Jing, the Storm Dragon. Meow Jing believes herself to be the strongest dragon sibling, and lords her power and position of authority as the protector of the Grand Bastion over her brothers and sisters. Despite her earned arrogance, she is well aware of the significance of the task laid at her feet to protect Grand Cathay from the hordes of chaos to the north. The constant scheming of the mortal lords of Nangao, her capital and unconquerable home, does not make it any easier. As such a powerful and ancient being, she emits an aura of command and majesty that even mighty heroes find difficult to resist. Her followers seek her favor, and her enemies fear her bite and strong magics. On the battlefield, she can channel these powers to transform between her dragon and human forms as needed. Both dragons are also masters of the elemental winds. This attribute, which is shared among all Grand Cathay spellcasters, increases their power of all spells cast for each spellcaster in the army. This makes taking multiple spellcasters all the more effective for the armies of Grand Cathay, even doubling or better the power of spells should you have enough. Of course, they may not have the army to back them up at that point. Okay, so what we're learning here is that spellcasters in Grand Cathay buff each other, so the more you bring, the stronger they get. Does this mean that you can basically take a doom stack of 20 spellcasters and that's it? I mean, it kind of sounds like it given the blog post, but we have to keep in mind that this could just be sensationalism for the faction, hype them up. Though spellcasters are always pretty strong, and if they're pretty well armored and have decent mounts, that's all cool. But let's move on to her unique abilities and skills. There's not a lot of information here. Magic. Meow Jing has access to a unique selection of spells from the laws of yin and life. Okay, so she has a mixture. That's not too bad. It would have been nice if she had the full spells, but hey, why not? It's still pretty decent as long as you get some pretty good spells. And finally, Disdain of Dragons. All enemies who try to combat Meow Jing will find themselves at a significant disadvantage. That gives no context whatsoever. Really, it does not. I guess this just means terror and maybe some other debuffs that she'll emit constantly, which kind of makes sense given the lore, but we're going to have to wait and see. Again, no context. A little bit of context would help here, Creative Assembly. Just saying. And we've also got some art for Meow Jing, which looks pretty cool. I'll be very honest with you, I kind of prefer her without the helmet and the cape. Maybe a modder will do that when she eventually gets released, because, I don't know, she just looks better without it. That's just personal preference, however, so let's move on. Okay, let's move on to the next legendary lord, Xiao Ming. Ruler of the Western Provinces, the Iron Dragon is seen as a much more down-to-earth ruler and commander than his sister. Xiao Ming commands loyalty through comradeship, as well as his creation and use of powerful artifacts and magic items. He is one of the Empire's premier alchemists, and welcomes the same within his realm, much to the chagrin of some of his siblings. Proximity to the Warpstone Desert and the Great Moor, still seeping with the destructive magic that created it, has led some to believe his mind is beginning to unravel. This would certainly explain some of the odd tendencies and decisions he makes, but is still far from anything approaching insurrection or dangerous to Grand Cathay. While less favored than his sister by the Celestial Dragon, their mother, the Moon Empress, has a soft spot for Xiao Ming. Both dragons lead their armies with incredible fervor, their mere presence enough to enhance the harmony and belief of their people to new heights. Non-character Cathayan units all ascribe to either yin or yang, and when close to the opposite receive buffs. Melee yang units become more defensive and harder to kill, while ranged yin units fire faster. Lords increase these benefits when they are nearby. Between this and the Master of the Elemental Winds attribute, it makes hero spellcasters quite a powerful choice for Grand Cathay armies. They are force multipliers, both battlefield-wide and in their area of effect, and proper usage can see massive odds overcome. Okay, so there's a few things to talk about here. So this is what the harmony mechanic is, which is really interesting. Keeping units around to be able to then get more buffs, and then extra Lord or other characters can then add even further buffs. Though it specifically mentions spellcasters, so I have a feeling that any characters that aren't spellcasters might not be used much. Which is a shame, because sometimes you want it for thematic purposes, or any other buffs. Hopefully they will be useful, but we will be discussing them in just a second. Now let's talk about the unique abilities and skills. Dragon Transformation. Both dragons can also swap forms in the midst of battle, becoming powerful melee units with the ability to fly. I have a feeling that they'll be able to just change. They did say at a whim, so maybe there's no cooldown or just a small one at the very least. Magic. Xiao Jing has access to a unique selection of spells from the lores of Yang and Metal. Okay, pretty decent. Once again, would have been cool to have them as the full spellcaster of the lore of Yang, or having both would be nice, as we do have characters with more than one spell lore. But hey, as long as it's a good mix, why not? And finally, Warding Iron. The Iron Dragon's near invulnerability can be passed on to his nearby troops for a short time. Okay, so that's going to make his troops really good. Does that mean that he'll be able to favor some melee armies? Because that would be kind of cool. Because melee, well, as we are all aware, in Total War, especially Warhammer, it's not viable whatsoever, so let's just hope. Finally, we have some artwork revolving around Xiao Jing, and this is really curious. It's a bit more bestial. I'm guessing this is mid-transformation, unless there's a special mechanic which will have him transform into this human-dragon hybrid for a little while. Again, we don't get really told much here, but I think so? Well, it looks cool at the very least, so why not? Okay, let's start looking towards the generic lord choices. First up, we have the dragon-blooded Xiao lords. I am pretty sure I'm saying that incorrectly. While relatively rare, the ancient nature of the dragon siblings means their many own progeny now exist within Grand Cathay. They often rise to positions of power, not least out of respect for their heritage, but also due to the power that comes from being part of the family. The dragon-blooded, as they are known, are inevitably skilled combatants, natural sorcerers, and talented leaders. As you can imagine, their lineage can be a source of some jealousy and resentment from high-ranking mortals, especially when the dragon-blooded allow their abilities to develop into arrogance. As the magic wielders of Grand Cathay, the dragon-blooded fight with either the lore of Yang or the lore of Yin. Each takes its power from the celestial dragon emperor, and is a unique school passed down through the ages. Okay, so what we're getting here is these are essentially dragonborn in a certain sense. They're actually born through the dragon siblings and possibly mortal lovers. It's rather curious, but hey, why not? We've seen weirder things happen in Warhammer lore. The more weirder thing to note here is the fact that they only have access to 2 spell lores. So these lords only have access to the lore of Yin or the lore of Yang. You'd expect a few more, considering that we know other dragons are able to hold the lore of life and the lore of metal, but hey, I guess it's balancing purposes or possible future DLC. Who knows? Most likely the second. Before we move on to the spell lores, which we have a little bit of information, we can check out some art regarding the dragon-blooded, and I like them. I'm just not a fan of the helmet. For some reason, the helmets so far haven't been looking cool. But other than that, the gear looks nice. Like, you can tell they are regal and they are part of royalty, even though that the dragons aren't really royalty. You must get my gist. But yeah, I like it. It's honestly really nice. Oh, and just a quick note here, I forgot to mention that they do have mount options, which is nice, of course. Mounts are Warhorse or Jade Longmar. We're going to be talking about the Longmar in just a second, so don't you worry about that. Now let's talk about the lore of Yang. The lore of Yang focuses on buffing allies with resolute belief or disrupting enemies with walls of wind. In particular dire situations, it can also unleash mighty explosions upon the enemy, bringing with it the power of the celestial dragon emperor himself. Their spells are Jade Shield, Dragon's Breath, Wall of Wind and Fire, Stone Ground Stance, Might of Heaven and Earth, Constellation of the Dragon. I'm assuming that's the one that's going to be very powerful. Unfortunately, they're not telling us how these spells work, but I guess we're going to have to wait until the gameplay reveal happens. Now let's check out the Lore of Yin. The Lore of Yin is a more esoteric school, with the power to reflect projectiles or summon the ghosts of the dead to assist them in battle. Those who practice it can shield their allies behind obfuscation and remove foes in the dead of night. Their spells are Storm of Shadows, Cloak of Jet, Missile Mirror, Blossom Wind, Talons of Night, and Ancestral Warriors. So far we're getting a lot of defensive type of spells, and even summoning up some Dead Warriors. That should be interesting. I'm rather curious to see Missile Mirror in action. We've seen it in the little gameplay they showed off, but even then that's not really enough to get a proper grasp on the spell. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long. Please, I want to know about these lores, they're new. Now we can check out the other Lord choice, the Lord Magistrate. Be they generals or lords of one of Grand Cathay's gargantuan cities, magistrates are some of the best the Empire has to offer. While not the greatest single combatants of their nation, they are expert commanders, inspiring and directing their troops with the skill and efficiency that comes from only years of experience in real battles. If they are engaged, they are melee warriors capable of holding their own against most enemies. In particularly large engagements, magistrates may ride aboard a sky lantern, commanding their troops from above with a more strategic view of the battlefield. It also, as you can imagine, keeps them somewhat out of harm's way, a priority of some, if not all. Their true strength lies in their ability to bring the best of Grand Cathay to the fore, vastly increasing the bonuses received by the troops working in harmony with one another, and their mount options are the Warhorse and Sky Lantern. Okay, so obviously we've known this because it said it before, but it's nice to see that characters won't have all the same mount options. Kislev. But other than that, so this Lord character is focused around buffing rather than anything else, which, okay, works well. It's nice to see a Lord generic melee option which has more functionality, because, you know, Empire Generals and so on, they often don't get used in campaign because you want a spellcaster or a ranged character or something, you know, something that does a bit more than throwing it in and hoping it doesn't die. So yeah, it's nice to see this. It's a great movement. Before we move on, we can check out their artwork. And yeah, they look cool. I like the look of this. This is, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of Yuan Shao in Three Kingdoms and so on. Maybe a bit more focusing that on Dynasty Warriors. It's different and it looks cool. It's nice to see that we're getting a lot of diverse type of art style when it comes to Grand Cathay. Obviously because Games Workshop and Creative Assembly have been inspired by multiple eras in Chinese history. So this works out quite well. I like the look of them at least. Now we can move on to the generic hero choices, and the first one we have is the Alchemist. The laws of yin and yang are not the only magics practiced in Grand Cathay. Though they are the most favored, alchemists gravitate to the Iron Dragon in the west and the city of Shangyang precisely because he is uncommonly accepting of their talents and practices. Over the years, this has grown into a powerful cabal that often sees its members hired by generals all over the Empire, as their capabilities are far beyond that of most mortals. Their potions imbue them with spells from the lore of metal, as well as giving them unique buffs that can be applied to themselves or nearby units, providing massive bonuses to attack or armor. They've also got a mount option, which is that of a warhorse. Okay, so they'll be able to buff up stuff too. That's great. Once again, the more that heroes are made more useful, barring that of just spells, because spells are very powerful as it is, the better. So it's nice to see that this direction is being taken forward, though I fear for other races from Warhammer 1 and 2, as they will be pretty much left in the dark. We've got some artwork for the Alchemists here, which is pretty interesting. It looks like they're focusing around a tiger aesthetic and so on. They will have different mask variants, which is obviously really cool. I like it when we can recruit heroes and they'll look different each time. Well, possibly just like 3 or 4 variants as usual, but hey, it's better than nothing. I think it's nice though. And so far, Cathay's looking cool. Now let's move on to the Astromancers. Astromancers are the accepted sorcerers of Grand Cathay, practicing the Celestial Dragon Emperor's favored lore of heavens and harnessing it to an expert level thanks to the natural affinity between their leader and the Azure Wind. After more than 5,000 years of perfecting the art, they are quite adept, and only more so when riding into battle aboard the Wuxing War Compass. Mounts are of course Warhorse and the Wuxing War Compass. Interesting, lots of mount variety, unlike someone. But yeah, let's move on. We were expecting Astromancers. In fact, a lot of old lore in Warhammer Fantasy pointed a lot to Astromancers, so it's good to see this is still being kept here. And yeah, cool. Again, we've got some artwork, and if you're wondering why I'm looking at this art, it's because not every unit gets shown some artwork, but the Astromancers here do, and they kind of look more like diplomats more than anything else, don't they? They still look nice, and it's a good aesthetic. I quite like it. I'm not too sure about the helmet. I think it's just helmets right now for me. But other than that, I mean, it's got a nice aesthetic. That's always the most important thing. Alright, so now we can start moving on to Grand Cathay's units. So yeah, it's been a while, but hey, this has been a big blog post. Let's start off with the most basic, the Peasant Long Spearmen. The backbone of Grand Cathay is its people, and they are numerous beyond count. While the Celestial Dragon Emperor is wise and his children are benevolent leaders to the people under their command, they understand with the detachment of immortality that the one thing they will always have is more bodies. More men and women to man the battlements, more fighters to hold the line, more defenders to make the forces arrayed against them to fight for every inch. That's incredibly grim. He clearly does not care about his people. Wow. Okay, let's move on. Thus, the least trained armies of Grand Cathay are still a power to be reckoned with through sheer force of numbers. Unlike the hired soldiers or lower classes of other factions, the warriors of wind and field, as they are known, feel a fierce loyalty to their cause, and the dragons that watch over them. They may buckle and even break, but they know their role. That's more leading through terror, but okay. I have a real big feeling that these guys are basically going to be the Skaven slaves of Cathay, so yeah, it just kind of sounds like that. But let's move on to the notable characteristics. Like all melee units, Peasant Long Spearmen are Yang aligned, increasing their leadership and melee defense when within close proximity to a Yin unit. Okay, so that's how it works. Everyone just has to be close to each other. Turtling is going to work very well for this faction. Their long spears give them a fantastic charge defense when bracing, making them a suitable anti-cavalry and anti-large force. Okay, cool. Let's just hope that spears are more worth it now. As noted, the endless ranks of Grand Cathay are expendable and expected to flee from battle when facing more than they can handle. Finishing the fight is the work of more disciplined troops. So low leadership, yeah, Skaven slaves just Cathayan. Alright, interesting. It will be nice to have a trash unit which you can just throw, buckle up with all the enemies, and then just bombard it with artillery, which I'm assuming this is what's going to happen. Now we can take the time to look at the artwork before we move on, and they look like peasants. Yeah, I don't really see them lasting in combat for a long time. I mean, what are they mostly wearing? Linen? They've got a little bit of armor on the shoulder, but that's not going to keep them safe. Well, I guess every race needs some cannon fodder. Jade Warriors are next, and unfortunately there's no art to represent them. The Jade Warriors are Grand Cathay's line troops. They are the standing army, expertly trained and well equipped to defend from ogres, rebels, chaos, or anything else that might come wandering in from the west and north. Each city maintains its own regiment of Jade Warriors, and few make their home outside of one of the metropolises that dot the landscape of Grand Cathay. In times of war, they will head to battle armed in numerous possible ways, collectively known as the Warriors of Jade and Steel. The ranged firepower of Grand Cathay is what breaks the enemy, but the Jade Warriors, so named for the Celestial Dragon Emperor's sacred stone, must hold the line and cut down enemies who think them weak. Okay, so they're going to be tier 2? Because we have some more units coming up now, which, I don't know, maybe they'll just be tier 3 and we'll just skip tiers? I don't know, but they sound very, very powerful. Variance-wise, we have Sword and Shield and Halberd, so 2 different ones here, though they always say that they come with numerous things, so you'd be expecting a bit more weapons. Notable characteristics are as follows. Long trained to defend Grand Cathay against the relentless assaults from beyond the Grand Bastion. Jade Warriors adopt a defensive stance when immobile, making them harder to charge and kill. Okay, so they'll be able to brace, and that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Seeing that with Sword and Shield, especially if you're going to be dealing with a lot of melee, which you will if you're fighting Khorne, this should be quite interesting. This builds as they remain that way, taking the lay of the land and bedding in to fend off the next attack, further increasing their charge resistance and armor. Okay, so they're going to start getting more buffs as they stay still. Sounds like something the dwarf should have and should probably have in the future, but let's move on. While the halberd-wielding variant is unable to block missile fire due to lack of shields, it is no less adept at bedding in to take a charge head-on and destroy any force foolish enough to challenge them. Yeah, these are going to be fairly powerful. Honestly, I want to see them in play because, yeah, you could bed in all you want, but if you're dealing with a faction that can work around you and just get you from the side or the rear, are they going to be able to bed fully? Is there going to be a formation? It's something that we need to know. Hopefully soon. The last unit of note is the Celestial Dragon Guard. Grand Cathay's elite soldiers are officially the Legion of the Dragon Emperor, his loyal defenders. As the Eastern Empire has expanded, more and more Dragon Guard have been added to the Celestial Host, which now numbers enough that they can be dispatched to battlefields all over the East. Their arrival represents an exponential increase in power for the army, not least for the morale boost it gives to soldiers to see such direct connection to their emperor. Their notable characteristics are as follows. Wielding halberds, they are natural opponents to the armored and the massive, as capable of spearing a beast from the Chaos Waste as a man from his horse. However, as the most well-trained units in Cathay, they are capable of defending against charges from anything, be it Chaos Warrior or Skaven Slave. They are superior to their brothers in the Jade Warriors in every way but one. There are simply less Celestial Dragon Guard out there, so I'm guessing that these will be locked to some sort of mechanic that you can increase whilst building certain buildings or something. It makes sense if they're going to be as powerful as stated, though then again, their melee units and range and magic will normally deal with them fairly quickly, though it seems that they can boost morale of units, so I guess they'll also increase leadership? This stuff is always left in the open air like this, and, well, it's kind of annoying sometimes, because you want to know exactly what some units do, but we aren't really given much. We do have some artwork revolving them, and we've seen this before. These are really cool. They're definitely going to be fun to paint if they ever come out as miniatures, that's for sure, as a lot of armor in both yellow and silver works very, very well. I like the look. I like the helmet, actually. For once, I do like the helmet. So, yeah, awesome. Okay, let's start moving on to Missile Infantry, and first we have the Peasant Archers. Unfortunately, no artwork for them. Archery is considered a noble and useful pastime in Grand Cathay, and young girls are especially encouraged to follow the path of the Moon Empress into ranged combat. Thus, even the lowest in society will have a well-maintained bow within their household and be more than capable of drawing it to defend their home. Naturally, however, they are not particularly well equipped and are more deterrent than professionals, so it's kind of like one of those memes where you see a guy with a gun in his porch. Okay, cool. Notable characteristics as follows. As with any ranged unit among Cathayan armies, Peasant Archers are yin aligned, receiving bonuses when close to yang units. They are also expendable, though slightly less expected to be in the thick of things as an archer. Yeah, this makes sense, you don't want your archers in close combat. However, despite their mighty number and decent training, the gear of the peasantry is simply unlikely to cause as much damage to heavily armored foes. You've obviously not seen a peasant bowman Bretonnian doomstack. But yeah, I guess that makes sense, and they'll possibly be buffed up to be quite dangerous if you know how to buff up your troops. Next we have the Iron Gunners. The closest we can get to an old world shotgun. Awesome! The Iron Hail Gun is a short-range blunderbuss that can rip through almost anything if positioned correctly. Okay, cool. I mean, love shotguns, so this is cool. The gunners themselves are lightly armored, making them vulnerable if surprised, and quite the glass cannon of a unit. However, should they bring their guns to bear even for a moment, never mind a sustained period, it spells doom for even the heaviest of warriors. Okay, so very hard hitting, just very squishy, which kind of makes sense. They don't look like they have a lot of armor. I'm going to show the artwork in just a second, but let's look at the notable characteristics. The strength of gunpowder gives these units a heavy armor-piercing punch when they line up a shot. Again, makes sense as normal. Their range is much shorter than either archers or crossbowmen elsewhere in the army. Well, I wonder how short this range is going to be, as handgunners are more rifles than anything else, so maybe they're going to have to be quite close, which is going to be interesting, because if they can break quite easily, this is not going to last long, unless you can just get them on the flank. And finally, however, this can be quite an advantage when used to keep them in a useful position for harmony and still pumping out heavy damage. Again, this is literally just flanking being around the enemy, being close to your melee troops, but still being able to fire. The artwork looks cool. I wonder why they're showing every single unit with different colors, though you'd imagine that to be different factions at the very least. Unless Cathay is going to be extremely colorful, but I very much doubt it. Still looks cool, and it's a shame that we couldn't see the weapon too. I mean, we've seen it in the cinematics, but it would have been nice to have a close-up so we could just inspect it a little bit, maybe for the future, though I'm imagining that we'll hit gameplay at some point soon. Unless they want to keep drip feeding, which I very much hope they don't. Next we have the Crane Gunners. Unfortunately no artwork provided here. The mighty crane gun requires 2 people to lift, set up and fire. One is positioned at the trigger, ready to sight and shoot anything in a massive range. The other carries the tower shield on which the gun rests, steadying the shooter as well as providing built-in cover. It is a specialist device for the highly trained, but it can be devastatingly effective when properly employed. Range and precision are nothing to scoff at, especially if they're pointed at your head. No artwork was provided for this, but this is the Cathayan Jezile. I mean, that's the best way to call it. So let's move on to the notable characteristics. Save artillery will outrange anything on the battlefield, acting as effective snipers. Yeah, same as the Jezile, so that makes sense. Their armor-piercing rounds and heavy shields make them a unique, difficult unit for enemies to deal with, especially if unprepared. I wonder how these are going to be better than the Jeziles. I'm imagining that the shields are going to give them a lot of armor. 2 people for the price of 1, bargain. Yeah, just a bad joke there. Now we'll move on to the Jade Warrior Crossbowmen, and this has artwork, so I'm imagining it's going to be the same armor used for the standard Jade Warriors too, as that makes sense. Crossbowmen are the ranged backbone of the Grand Cathayan army, assigned to Jade Warriors and Dragon Guard who show an aptitude for shooting rather than stabbing. Does that mean that we're going to have Dragon Guard with crossbows? Because it didn't say it there before. But I assume they mean that everyone's just going to look like a Jade Warrior Crossbowman, which I guess makes sense. While Grand Cathay brings powerful magics and giant machinery to war, it is ever less present in their armies than other factions. Sorcerers are an important precious resource, while the construction required for a lantern or war compass may be beyond the poorest cities. The crossbow is as close to an industrialized production as the handcrafted weapons in Grand Cathay get, though there will still be suitable differences between the direction of one master artificer and another. This makes Jade Warriors equipped with crossbows a mainstay of city defense, entrusted to outrange their opponents and defeat them before they get within striking distance. Here we have 2 variants, crossbow and shield, which is pretty good as obviously you want to have your armored one and the crossbow shield kind of works very well. Now, notable characteristics. While their armor weighs them down slightly, they will defeat a peasant archer in all other areas. Yeah, we can kind of expect that. That increased armor, especially when further improved with a shield, makes them difficult for other range units to trade with efficiently. So I'm assuming that they'll be able to have the shield out and fire at the same time, which would be kind of cool, and then it pays for Purvey's crossbowmen in the southern realms, maybe? And finally, while not a melee troop, will happily survive and even defeat lesser foes in the midst of close range engagement. Okay, cool, so they'll be semi-decent, which makes sense, as you'll want to be able to defend yourself if you need it. And these can be placed in front of the archers, so that way you've got a stronger second line in case your first line breaks. We've got some artwork here. I really like the look of these guys, especially just the whole armor aesthetic. It looks really nice. These are definitely going to be very fun to paint. Easy too, which is always a plus because, yeah, lazy. But other than that, yeah, they look cool. Alright, so we do have other crossbowmen, which are Celestial Dragon crossbowmen. This is where the confusion kicked in, as I'm reading this for the first time, as that way you can get a genuine response from me. When the Celestial Host, the combined name for the various sections of the Dragon Guard, makes war, it does so in style and with power. The dragon crossbows are repeating powerhouses, with armor-piercing bolts to rip through almost anything, and fierce training to keep up the fire. Shielded with the best armor in Grand Cathay, and very little can stand up to a hail of bullets from their troops. Repeater crossbows were kinda expected, and yeah, I guess they'll be pretty cool. If we look at the notable characteristics, they're as follows. Crane gunners will outrange and outdamage them. The Celestial Dragon Guard are harder and more powerful in all forms of warfare. Shields keep them protected, while the power of the crossbows makes their bolts armor-piercing. While not a true hybrid, they're also more than capable of holding their own in battle. Okay, so yeah, it's a hybrid, but not a powerful hybrid. Still pretty good, and that means that you can have them and do a lot of damage with them. It's going to be interesting. I want to see how these guys work. Again, gameplay, please. Let's move on to cavalry and chariots, and there are quite a few to talk about. The first would be peasant horsemen, which unfortunately has no artwork. As they are everywhere in the world, the horse is the most common steed and beast of burden in Grand Cathay. Plenty of the peasantry learn to ride as a part of their duties, and carrying goods or information across the great distances of the nation is tantamount to its survival. Thus, when called to war, many can mount up and act as scouts or harrowing attackers for larger enemies. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Though peasants again, will they not have a lot of leadership? How would this work? I'm assuming in a very similar way to the peasant riders for Bretonnia? Their notable characteristics are as follows. The fastest Cathayan unit that can't fly. Wow, okay, that should be interesting. Will deploy ahead of the main army to scout and act as a vanguard, so they'll have vanguard, and like foot melee troops, cavalry belong to the Yang Harmony. Okay, that makes sense. That actually could be very interesting. Say that you've got a front line of footmen, your archers are on the side, and you're fighting like a big blob of Chaos Warriors, and then your horsemen charge from behind to also get the bonus from the archers on the side. It makes sense, and it could be quite cool. Honestly, again, want to play. I think you all do too. Next we have Jade Lancers. Again, no artwork, but we do have a quite cool description. Put a Jade Warrior with all their training, all their armor, and all their power on a horse, and this is what you get. Grand Cathay's mainstay cavalry is a hard-hitting, well-armored force. Often, Jade Lancers are part of scouting groups that head beyond the Great Bastion to break up and destroy Chaos tribes in the region before they can gather up their power and be a threat. Doing so is as dangerous as it is necessary. Okay, so this is more of a lore tidbit, but this was sometimes common with some elves, sometimes even Kislev, so it's nice to see that that's also there in the Far East, as it kind of makes sense. If you see something gathering up and they're kind of weak at the moment, take them out before it becomes a problem. The notable characteristics are as follows. Slower but heavier than standard horsemen, Jade Lancers will deal extreme damage to infantry formations they crash into. They are also great on the defense, heavily armored with shields to protect themselves further, and finally, conforming to Grand Cathay's defensive nature, they are far hardier than other factions' cavalry of a similar sort. Well, you know, Grail Knights exist, but okay. I'm rather curious to see what's going to go on here, and we'll have to see them in gameplay, though if they're going to be very heavy defensive cavalry, it's going to be quite interesting. Finally, we have great Longmar riders, which is weird because they say cavalry and chariots, yet there are no chariots here. But let's move on. Dragon-blooded who are yet to rise to their own prominence, or prefer a place within the celestial host for the honor it brings, often become great Longmar riders, flying to battle alongside other elements of the celestial host. They are the solution to endless problems on the battlefield, from enemy flyers to the hardiest of ground troops. So this is what you'll be using to charge directly into flying bloodthirsters, I'm assuming. Notable characteristics are as follows. While Grand Cathay is often focused on dealing damage from afar, anything in the way of the great Longmar riders is unlikely to survive for long. Their speed, the power of their charge, and the strength of their armor is unmatched. Such is the strength of the Longmar charge that enemies have been known to flee in fear before they are even beaten. That sounds like propaganda for me, but okay. I'm making a few jokes here, but I really hope that Cathay is just not horrendously overpowered, because so far we're getting a lot of that for the blog, though I know this is trying to sell the faction to you guys, it's understandable, but it just sounds so, you know. So we've got some artwork here for the Longmar itself. We don't get to see the rider atop of it, though it looks pretty interesting. They're very colourful, that's for sure. We've already seen them in a few cinematics, and yeah, they look fun. I want to see how they do. I'm imagining these are going to be more like Pegasus riders, though maybe with the strength of Hippogriff riders. Does that make sense? So we're going to move on to the constructs now, and there's only one, the Terracotta Sentinel. Grand Cathay's ancient protectors, the Terracotta Sentinels are remnants of an era long past, when the Celestial Dragon Emperor was an active leader in the nation's armies. Tales of their creation range from the believable to the legendary, that each was a personally blessed soldier of the Dragon Emperor in a great army to fend off chaos in these earliest years. True or not, they stand sentinel all over Cathay, often silent and still for centuries. armies, overlooking paddy fields, or partially submerged in rivers, or even as stanchions in the Great Bastion itself. But the light within will burn, and the statue will finally move if summoned to a nearby threat. See, this is the type of lore that we could get in the unit spotlights, which will make stuff more interesting rather than boom, smoke, you know? But let's move on to the notable characteristics. The ultimate in Cathayan defense of their settlements and armies, laying waste to anything lucky enough to make contact with it. Truly alien to most armies of the world, and either impossibly massive or an ancient enemy, it causes deep terror in the hearts of any who array against it. I mean, truly ancient, we have loads of bone constructs for the Tomb Kings, but yeah. As happily destroying steam tanks and city gates as it is laying waste to enemy armies, so this is going to be very powerful. We have an art picture here. We're not going to show it for long because obviously we've already seen this very heavily on the unit spotlight, so let's move on to flying war machines. First up, we've got the Sky Lantern. Sky Lanterns serve dual purpose on the battlefield. They are often crewed by magistrates or other commanders that can oversee and direct the troops below, using a complex system of fans and smoke. Sounds too complicated for me, bro. Thank you. However, they are also crewed by 4 crane gunners sitting in an armored carriage held aloft by the balloon, itself in place thanks to an ever-burning vermilion warbird. It is generally agreed that they have a lot more fun than their landlocked cousins. Notable characteristics are as follows. While glacially slow to move around the battlefield, it provides much needed vantage points for troops below, allowing them to spot enemies hiding in foliage and giving them a morale boost. Okay, pretty interesting, but still, if you can see the enemy, they can see you too, and if they've got range, they should be able to shoot you down. The crane gunners are truly deadly. Nothing is between them and their targets. They do not have to stop to fire, and they can see all from above. Okay, so 360-degree firing arc should be quite interesting. And finally, as flying units armed with gunners, both this and the Sky Junk are yin aligned. Okay, so they'll also be able to provide benefits from flying high above. That's pretty interesting, though they move relatively slowly as far as this is suggested, so I don't know. I don't know how a slow war machine is going to help. Granted, sniper fire is always very useful, but yeah, still, slow moving, it's going to get caught out very easily. We've got some artwork here, and it's very colourful. At least it looks like it's going to be, unless this is just dividing for different factions in the future. But I like the look of it, though I still don't understand the war balloon. Like, would you not just be worried about a flying pigeon smashing into it and cutting it, or then you just start crashing down on the floor? I don't know, maybe I'm looking too much into this. Next we have the Sky Junk. The Sky Junk is more warship than a simple battlefield unit. Its humongous size supports great guns that project shrapnel at oncoming enemies, wiping out whole battle lines. Within the armored carrier beneath the main balloon are a host of bombs ready to be dropped on those below. During times of great danger, fleets of Sky Junks are seen floating from the Great Bastion, moving steadily towards the latest threat, and fully intend to wipe them out. Okay, sounds fun. I mean, it's still going to be moving slow, I imagine, so we're going to have to wait and see how this does. I'll look at the artwork and I'm going to show it to you in a little bit, but yeah, big seagull or something smashes through the balloon, you're screwed. Notable characteristics are as follows, however. A larger, more deadly Sky Lantern packed with soldiers that spew fire rain rockets at enemies, can drop makeshift bombs from above on unsuspecting foes, dealing massive damage. Slow and near useless once out of ammunition, the Sky Junk is nevertheless an incredibly valuable addition to the battlefield if used right. Oh, so you ran out of ammo and nothing. Okay, well, probably not going to recruit these then myself. The artwork itself is showing that it's quite pretty. I mean, I like the look of it. It's pretty interesting. I must admit, again, like I said before, just one seagull. That's all it takes. One seagull. Let's move on to the Grand Cannon. Oxen carry the artillery of Grand Cathay to war, pulling these guns to battle from the city walls and Great Bastion they usually inhabit. More suited to firing from on high, these cannons will still rip apart anything they gain sighting on, but benefit greatly from smartly used terrain. Yeah, this all makes sense. You want them on a high note so you can fire down. Shaped like dragons and belching flaming projectiles, they are not a subtle representation of Grand Cathay's power. Yeah, this kind of makes sense with a lot of cultures sometimes. You get that when they just use the animal that they know of the most and just put it everywhere. but notable characteristics are as follows. While being Grand Cathay's most basic form of artillery, they still pack a huge punch, more than capable of toppling monsters or city walls. The flaming armored-piercing projectiles will make short work of smaller foes placed in their path. The oxen pulling it are pretty cute, all told, and make it and other Cathayan artillery more mobile than counterparts from other factions, which, I'm actually really happy that we're getting the oxen. I know that's a silly thing, but they were shown off in the trailer, and I was worried that was just being used for effects or something, but it's nice to see the oxen taking part. If we just look at the artwork for the cannon, that is a big cannon. That's gonna do a lot of damage. It's kind of like putting a massive cannonball into a mortar, but then making the mortar fire forward instead of up. This is going to be pretty interesting. It's kind of maybe inspired by the Ogre Kingdom's Iron Blaster. That's something from the tabletop, which I'm assuming is going to be in Total War Warhammers. It would be ridiculous not to. Now we've got a unit that everyone's been pretty much waiting for, the Wuxing War Compass. Perhaps the oddest part of Grand Cathay's armory to an outsider. This miniaturized version of the Great Compass engraved into the floor of the Celestial Court high above Wei Jin is a powerful tool for manipulation of the elemental winds. Imbued with the power of the heavens and intricately designed as a weapon of war, meteors and lightning storms are summoned in its wake. While expensive to build and maintain, they are truly a unique weapon. Okay. Notable characteristics are as follows. A mounted spellcaster with access to unique long-range spells that deal damage to enemy formations. Then, if that's happening, certain things in the Empire need to get changed too, please. More than capable of tearing up the ground and crashing headlong into enemy forces, making it a Yang-aligned unit, but with significant range prowess, so it's a hybrid but focused on one side. And regains its own power with increased speed thanks to control over the elemental wind. So it's going to be really fast. With oxen pulling it? This is going to be interesting. Why not? Stranger things have happened in the Warhammer world, so it's not far-fetched, but just kind of threw me off there. I must admit that the compass does look very, very cool. Wish that we could see some of those pretty oxen they mentioned, but hey, why not? It's very much like a few things that we've seen in the Empire, and some stuff that is missing in the Empire. So I'm rather curious to see exactly how destructive this is, and if other things need to be rebalanced. That's literally my biggest concern at the moment. And lastly, we have the Fire Rain Rocket. The ultimate in-range firepower for the armies of Grand Cathay. These rocket launchers spray the battlefield with deadly, explosive projectiles, vital for pitched battles as well as taking or defending settlements. Their rockets equally effective against almost all targets, and the arc of their fire easily penetrating enemy walls. While the impact is widespread at long range, this is only more effective against mass legions of enemies. And let's check out the notable characteristics before we comment. Has an inferior range, but greatly improved firepower over the Grand Cannon. Left to its own devices and placed near a melee unit to increase reload speed through yin harmony, fire rockets will happily wipe out whole formations. Both Cathayan artillery pieces have a higher than usual number of support staff on hand, making them much harder to wipe out of court. Okay, so this is the thing, this harmony thing sounds incredibly overpowered, and this kind of makes it sound like it too, because this is essentially the Cathayan Hellstorm rocket battery, and if it's able to fire even faster just because you have a unit next to it, that's going to make it ridiculous. We're going to have to wait and see what its rate of fire is, but I guess, it does sound a bit odd. Again, they're trying to sell the faction to you guys. This makes a lot of sense, but it sounds like Cathay has, barely any weaknesses. If most of the negatives have been talked about with, maybe the peasantry, then it just sounds like it's too powerful. I don't know, I could be wrong, and I hope I am. Aesthetically, it looks nice. Pretty much the Grand Cannon with just a few changes here and there. It's still really cool, and I guess it's going to be quite fast to move around with the oxen too. We're going to have to wait and see for that. Again, my only concern is just power balance. If Cathay is going to be too powerful, I'm not going to be interested in playing them. To be honest, I'm mostly interested in the reformed Kislev, well, better yet said rewritten, or whatever it is, because it just seems kind of bare at the moment unless we get Ungol DLC, and some demon factions, but I don't know, Cathay, if you sell it to me as way too powerful, I'm not interested. It's just not fun for me. I get this might be fun for some other people, but we're going to have to wait and see. Obviously, when gameplay comes out, we'll be able to get a proper look. This is just a roster reveal, and it's not really like representative of how they're going to play in the battlefield, but it's just a little fear I have. Though, mind you, I think I've been babbling on for way too long. So what do you guys think about Grand Cathay's roster? It's rather large, and there seems to be quite a lot of variety. Hopefully, this means that they will be subject to some DLC still, because it's fairly big. I think this is the biggest roster we've seen so far, but they could do with some more. You know, maybe a certain Monkey King would be cool. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fame level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel has been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.